Now, in this video, I want to share with you a book that has the potential to radically change your personal life and your church. Let's go. Now, if you're anything like me, you have some major goals for your life. And each of these goals have like 10 objectives which you need to tackle in order to reach that goal. So you find yourself trying to tackle all 10 objectives for each of your major life goals, and you're really like trying to juggle like 100 things all at once. Not only are you trying to get that promotion on the job and have a world-class family and lose those 5 pounds, but you're also trying to write that book, plan that vacation, renovate your kitchen, and on top of all of that, you have the bright idea of going back to school. Okay, so there's a lot going on. And yet the challenge is you only have a limited amount of time. So inevitably what happens is in your attempts to do everything, you do nothing. You get frustrated, you fall further and further behind, and you never experience the dreams and goals you have in your heart. If this is you, I can totally understand, because for a long time, this was me. And if I'm honest with you and myself, to a degree, this is still kind of me. But I stumbled upon a book that has really put this struggle in perspective for me. It's called The One Thing. It was written a few years ago, but this book is a gem. Now, the big idea behind this book is that you need to identify the one thing in your life that when you do this, everything else will either be easier or unnecessary. Now, the book is filled with gems like, be like a postage stamp. Stick to one thing until you get there. Or if you chase 2 rabbits, you won't catch either one of them. Or one half of knowing what you want is knowing what you must give up before you get it. I love the quote where he says, things which matter most must never be at the mercy of things which matter least. Or my favorite is, people don't decide their futures. They decide their habits. And their habits decide their futures. Now, at its core, there are a few principles that really stood out. Number 1, extraordinary results are directly determined by how narrow you can make your focus. He kind of relates it to the work of a surgeon. If you notice a surgeon, when they go in for the surgery, they're focused on that one area that they're in there to fix. They're not worried about the head. They're not worried about the tail. They're not worried about the feet. They are just focused with a laser focus on that one area. So if you want extraordinary results in your life, you have to have laser focus. Now, one way that you can accomplish this, he says, is by embracing this principle called time blocking. Now, time blocking is when you set aside 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes out of your day to focus on that one thing. It's when you say, I'm not going to answer the phone, I'm not going to look at email, I'm not going to get on social media, I'm going to focus on my one thing for these 15 minutes. Now, the reality is, if you had an hour to do that, that would be ideal. But most of us are so busy with life and responsibilities and kids and jobs and everything else that we don't have that extra hour during the day. But you do have 15 minutes. You do have 30 minutes that you can set aside. Maybe it's getting up 30 minutes earlier and saying, you know what, these first 30 minutes are for my one thing. Or staying up a little later and saying, these last 30 minutes are for my one thing. Whenever you set aside that time, it's up to you. But what he says is, if you're ever going to accomplish anything of significance, it's going to be because you prioritized it and you had a laser-like focus on that one thing. Now, the principles of this book can really transform your life. I'm beginning to see the effects of it in my own life. Now, if you decide not to focus on one thing, I want to let you know what you're sacrificing. Because if you do one thing, you can do that one thing on a world-class level. But if you add a second goal or a second objective to your one thing, you then sacrifice world-class, because you cannot do 2 things on a world-class level. You can do 2 things on an above-average level, but not on a world-class level. Well, if you try to add a third thing to your 2 things, what you're going to sacrifice is above average. And if you focus on 3 things in your life, let's say you want a world-class family and a world-class job and a world-class body, and the reality is is that you're not going to have a world-class family and a world-class job and a world-class body. You're going to have an average family, an average job, and an average body, because you can't do three things on a world-class level. If you add a fourth thing to your three things, what you do is you sacrifice average and you now become below average. Now, that might not be what you want to hear, and I'm sure some of you all may have some examples of how, no, you can't have world class in multiple areas of your life, but the reality is that for each of us, we only have a limited amount of time and resources in any given day. So what I'm suggesting is that you can't do it all. So why not just focus on the one thing and become world class in that one thing? Now, the principles of this book have tremendous application to your personal life, but there's also so much we can glean for our churches, nonprofits, small businesses. In fact, every organization on every level, including our government, can apply the principles from this book and experience world class. You see, the one thing is essentially identifying your mission and then treating everything else like it's a threat. Now, your mission is what you do, right? Your vision is where you're going. Your mission is what you do. Let's take churches, for example. What is the one thing as a church? What is the one thing that you do? You see, if you don't have a strategic mission as a church that is your highest priority, then inevitably your church will fracture into silos. Let me give you some examples. Children's ministry is trying to launch an initiative, but at the same time, the stewardship team is trying to launch an initiative. And inevitably, both ministries are competing for time, for resources, for space, for airtime. And as a result, there's going to be a conflict. Or a youth ministry team is fighting for space with a men's ministry team. Why? Because the youth ministry has their own objectives and the men's ministry has their own objectives, and neither are really communicating and neither are working towards the same goal. You see, when there is not a clear overarching mission, the one thing that everyone is working towards, chaos and dysfunction will inevitably ensue. I'm guaranteeing you it will happen. Now, in my church, our one thing, our mission, is to create opportunities for people to experience the love of God. What does that look like? It looks like when our youth get together, our youth leadership team, when they get together, the one question they are answering is, how are we going to create opportunities for our young people to experience the love of God? When our life groups get together, they're answering the question, how are we going to create opportunities for our life group participants to experience the love of God? When our worship team gets together, we're all answering that same question. How are we going to create opportunities for people to experience the love of God? And so if there's ever overlap or conflict, it's very easy to resolve because we recognize we're all trying to accomplish the same thing: create opportunities for people to experience the love of God. Now, the average church has a mission, but the average church does not have a one thing. And it's not a one thing because you have not aligned all of your ministries and programs around it. You see, in order for a mission to really be effective, you have to be willing to say, okay, because of this mission, we're not going to do this thing and we are going to do this thing. And you have to focus everything around that mission. But most of us in our churches, we have a mission that's there, but it's only there on paper. Like, we salute it, but we don't submit to it. We don't submit our programs to it. We don't submit our budget to it. We don't submit our resources to it. In fact, when the mission calls us to make certain sacrifices financially in our budget, maybe even laying to rest some of those sacred cows, we're not really willing to do that. And if that's your church, you don't have a one thing. You really just have a mission that has no power. So if your church falls in that category, you have a mission, but you don't have a one thing, this is what I want you to do. I want you to pull your leadership team together and ask the tough question: how can we align our ministries and programs and resources around this one thing? And whatever the answer is, I then want you to do what only the 1% do. I want you to execute. You have to execute. It's tough, I know. Some people aren't gonna like it, I know. You're not gonna make a lot of friends, I recognize it, but that's what's necessary in order to advance the mission and the agenda that you feel God has called you to accomplish as a church. Otherwise, stop calling it a mission and just let every ministry do whatever they're gonna do. Those are the principles found in the book. I would love to hear your feedback. This is the question of the day. Does your church have a one thing? And if you do, how have you been able to experience the power and the momentum and the synergy that comes from that one thing? Thanks so much for watching. Please like this video and share it. Leave a comment. I would love to hear from you. Peace.